The sun hung like a ball of molten copper above the canyon rim, as Zara Galloway stared up at the sheer walls that imprisoned her. Dust coating her once fine traveling dress and desperation clawing at her throat. 3 days she'd been here, hands bound when she slept, watched by men whose eyes held nothing of mercy, the notorious Yates Gang who'd ambushed the stagecoach carrying her to a new life in Bozeman, Montana Territory, 1876. Summer was already scorching the land, turning grass to brittle straw and creek beds to cracked earth. Zara's lips were chapped from thirst, her fair skin reddened from exposure. At 22, she'd left behind the sheltered life of a Boston schoolteacher for the promise of adventure and independence out west. Now she wondered if that choice would be her last. "Water's running low, Silas," drawled one of her captors, a thin man with yellowed teeth and a perpetual squint. "We ain't gonna last much longer hiding in this damn canyon." Silas Yates, the leader of the Outlaws, spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the dusty ground. "We'll move at nightfall. Sheriff's men are still combing the foothills. Once they give up, we'll head north with the girl." Zara shivered despite the heat. She knew what they intended to ransom her back to her uncle in Boston, or worse. The stagecoach driver and the other passengers had been killed during the robbery. Only she had been spared, and only because Silas had recognized her surname from the luggage tags. The Galloways weren't wealthy by Eastern standards, but out here, any family that could afford to send a daughter west for a teaching position was considered worth squeezing for money. "Please," she said, her voice cracking from disuse and thirst. "My uncle won't pay. He disowned me when I decided to come west." Silas's laugh held no humor. "Then I reckon we'll find another use for you, Miss Galloway." Night fell with a swiftness that still surprised Zara after months in the west. The stars emerged like diamond dust scattered across black velvet, offering little comfort. The canyon walls seemed to press closer in the darkness, and the Outlaws' campfire cast grotesque shadows that danced upon the rock. 4 men in total: Silas, the cruel-eyed leader, Denton, his quiet but dangerous right hand, Morris, the jumpy lookout with the squint, and Reeves, a hulking man whose massive hands had already struck Zara once when she'd tried to flee. Sleep eluded her as she lay on the hard ground, her wrists raw from the rope that bound them. The Outlaws snored around the dying embers of their fire, with only Morris keeping watch from a rocky outcrop above their makeshift camp. A subtle shift in the night sounds caught her attention, the faint crunch of boots on gravel, so quiet she might have imagined it. Morris hadn't noticed, his head drooping as he fought sleep. Zara held her breath, straining to hear. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the night. Morris tumbled from his perch, landing with a sickening thud on the canyon floor. The other Outlaws scrambled to their feet, weapons drawn. "Circle up," Silas barked, his gun already aimed at the darkness beyond their camp. Another shot rang out and Reeves clutched his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Silas and Denton fired blindly into the night, their bullets ricocheting off the canyon walls. Then silence fell again, heavy and ominous. "Show yourself," Silas shouted, his voice echoing against the stone. From the shadows stepped a lone figure, tall and broad-shouldered, silhouetted against the starlit sky. A cowboy, his hat pulled low, a rifle held steadily in his hands. "Let the woman go," he said, his voice deep and calm like distant thunder over the plains. Silas laughed. "One man, against the 3 of us." "You got a death wish, stranger." "Not a wish," the cowboy replied. "A promise. The lady walks free or none of you leave this canyon alive." Zara felt a thrill of hope mingled with fear. 1 man against 3 armed outlaws, the odds were impossible. "You're outnumbered," Denton called, trying to circle around behind the stranger. The cowboy shifted slightly, and moonlight caught the badge pinned to his vest. Name's Tucker Adair, U.S. Marshal, been tracking you boys since you hit that stage, Silas spat. Marshal or not, you're still just one man. What happened next unfolded in a blur. Denton lunged from the side and the marshal spun, his rifle crack splitting the air. Denton dropped. Silas and Reeves fired simultaneously, but the marshal had already rolled behind a boulder. Two more shots in quick succession, and Reeves howled, clutching his leg as he fell. Only Silas remained standing, using Zara as a shield now, his pistol pressed to her temple. Back off, Marshal, or she dies right here. Zara could feel the outlaw's ragged breathing against her neck, the stink of fear and sweat enveloping her. She closed her eyes, certain these were her final moments. You shoot her. You're dead before she hits the ground, came the marshal's steady voice from the darkness. Then we got ourselves a standoff, Silas replied, backing toward the horses tethered at the far end of the canyon. Zara opened her eyes and caught a glimpse of the marshal stepping into a shaft of moonlight. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, even in the dim light, were piercing as they locked with hers. When I say now, he mouthed silently, drop. She gave the barest nod. Silas continued edging backward, dragging her with him. They were 10 feet from the horses when the marshal called out, You know what your problem is, Yates? What's that? Silas growled. You never look up. Confused, Silas tilted his head just as the marshal shouted. Now! Zara dropped to her knees as a second rifle cracked from above a deputy positioned on the canyon rim. Silas staggered backward, clutching his chest, his pistol firing harmlessly into the dirt as he fell. The marshal was at her side in an instant, cutting the ropes from her wrists with a knife pulled from his boot. Are you hurt, Miss Galloway? How do you know my name? She gasped, rubbing her chafed wrists. Found your luggage on the trail. You're the only passenger unaccounted for. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he helped her to her feet. Tucker Adair. Most folks just call me Tuck. Zara Galloway, she replied automatically, then swayed as exhaustion and relief washed over her. He caught her before she could fall, his arms strong and steady around her waist. Easy now, you've been through hell. The others from the stage, she asked, already knowing the answer. His expression confirmed her fears. I'm sorry. We buried them proper, though. From above came a whistle and the marshal looked up. That's my deputy, Pete. He'll be down shortly. We've been tracking the Yates Gang for 2 weeks. He looked down at Silas's body without remorse. They've killed 12 people across 3 territories. Would have been 13, Zara murmured, suddenly overwhelmed by how close she'd come to death. The marshal handed her a canteen. Drink slowly, he cautioned as she raised it to her cracked lips. The water tasted sweeter than anything she'd ever known. Thank you, she whispered when she'd drunk her fill. For finding me, for... She gestured at the bodies of the outlaws. Tucker Adair nodded once, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. Madam, I'd ride through hell itself to bring justice to men like these. He paused, then added more softly, and to save a lady who doesn't belong in a place like this. By dawn, they had left the canyon behind. Zara rode double with the marshal on his sturdy chestnut gelding, while Deputy Pete led the outlaws' horses, the bodies of Silas and Morris draped over their saddles. Denton and Reeves, wounded but alive, rode with their hands bound, heads bowed in defeat. The morning sun revealed the true face of her rescuer, strong-jawed and handsome in a rugged way, with eyes the color of a summer storm and light brown hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. His face was kind but resolute, the face of a man who lived by a code. Bozeman's still your destination, he asked as they crested a hill, the Montana prairie stretching out before them like a golden sea. Zara nodded. I'm to teach at the new school, if they'll still have me after all this. They'll have you, he said with certainty. Town's been waiting on that teacher for months. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythm of the horse beneath them lulling Zara into a sense of safety she hadn't felt since the stagecoach attack. Without thinking, she leaned back against the marshal's solid chest, too exhausted to maintain her proper Boston posture. Rest if you need to, he said, his voice rumbling against her back. It's a long ride to Bozeman. You're stationed there? She asked, fighting to keep her eyes open. There was a pause before he answered. No, madam. My jurisdiction covers the territory. I don't much have a permanent home. Something in his tone made her turn slightly to look up at his face. That sounds lonely. His eyes met hers briefly, then returned to scanning the horizon. It's the life I chose. As I chose mine, she murmured, thinking of her family's opposition to her Western adventure. Her father had passed years ago, and her mother had remarried a wealthy Boston merchant who saw no reason for Zara to pursue a teaching career, let alone in the untamed West. Her uncle, her father's brother, had been particularly vocal in his disapproval. The marshal's arms tightened almost imperceptibly around her as he guided the horse around a rocky outcropping. Brave choice for a woman alone. I wasn't brave in that canyon, she admitted. I was terrified. Being brave isn't about not feeling fear, he said quietly. It's about what you do despite it. The words stayed with her as they continued their journey, stopping briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky and hardtack from the marshal's saddlebags. Deputy Pete, a cheerful young man barely out of his teens, kept watch over the prisoners while Zara cleaned her face and hands in a small creek. When she returned to the makeshift camp, she found Marshal Adair studying a worn map. Problem? She asked, noting the furrow between his brows. Storm coming, he replied, nodding toward the western horizon where dark clouds were gathering. We won't make Bozeman before it hits. There's that way station at Elk Creek, Pete suggested. About 4 hours' ride from here, the marshal nodded. We'll head there. Better than getting caught in the open. They set out again, pushing the horses harder as the storm clouds rolled toward them, bringing with them the scent of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. The landscape changed as they rode, the open prairie giving way to scattered pine forests and rocky outcroppings that spoke of the mountains beyond. By late afternoon, the wind had picked up, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. Zara shivered as water seeped through her thin dress. Without a word, Marshal Adair shrugged out of his oilskin duster and draped it around her shoulders, his arms reaching around to button it at her throat. His fingers brushed against her skin, and she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the coat. You'll get soaked, she protested. I've weathered worse, he replied, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. The way station appeared just as the storm broke in earnest, a low, sturdy building with attached stables and corrals. An older man with a grizzled beard hurried out to meet them, eyes widening at the sight of the bound prisoners. Marshal Adair. Didn't expect to see you again so soon. Wasn't planned, Hank. Need shelter from the storm and a place to keep these men secure until we can get them to Bozeman. Hank nodded, already helping them dismount. Got the place mostly to yourself tonight. Just one freight wagon heading east holed up in the barn. Inside, the station was simple but clean, a large common room with a stone fireplace, a few rough-hewn tables and chairs, and doors leading to small sleeping quarters. Hank's wife, Martha, a plump woman with kind eyes, took one look at Zara's bedraggled state and immediately bustled her away to a private room. You poor thing, look at the state of you. I've got some clothes might fit left by a passenger last year. Never did come back for them." An hour later, Zara emerged transformed. She had bathed in a tin tub behind a screen, washing away days of grime and fear. The borrowed dress was simple but clean, a faded blue calico that was a bit loose on her slender frame. Martha had helped her comb the tangles from her honey blonde hair, which now hung in damp waves down her back. The common room fell silent as she entered. Deputy Pete stared openly before remembering his manners. The two prisoners, secured to heavy wooden chairs, wouldn't meet her eyes. And Marshal Adair. His expression shifted from surprise to something she couldn't quite name before he quickly looked away. "Feeling better, Miss Galloway?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Much, thank you." She took a seat at the table where Martha was laying out a simple supper of venison stew and cornbread. "I can't remember when food last smelled so wonderful." The meal passed pleasantly, with Hank sharing news of the territory and Pete entertaining them with stories of his misadventures as a new deputy. Marshal Adair ate quietly, contributing little to the conversation, though Zara often felt his eyes on her when she wasn't looking. After supper, with the prisoners secured in a storage room under Pete's guard, Zara found herself alone with the marshal by the fire. Outside, rain lashed against the windows and thunder shook the little station. "Will we be able to travel tomorrow?" she asked, watching the flames dance. "Depends on the rain," he replied, cleaning his revolver with practiced movements. "These mountain storms can flood the creek beds, make crossing dangerous." Zara nodded, trying not to feel disappointed at the delay. After the ordeal in the canyon, she should have been grateful for any safe harbor, yet she found herself eager to reach Bozeman, to begin the life she had journeyed so far to create. "You're still worried," the marshal observed, setting aside his weapon. "Not worried exactly." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I've spent my whole life being proper Miss Galloway of Beacon Hill. Coming west was my chance to be more, to do something meaningful." "Teaching is meaningful work," he said, "especially out here. Most of those children have never had a proper education." "And what about you, Marshal? What brought you to this life?" He was silent so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "Justice, I suppose. My father was a sheriff in Kansas, killed by cattle rustlers when I was 15. His fingers absently traced the badge on his vest. Took the star to honor him, stayed because it needed doing. And no one waiting for you somewhere." The question slipped out before she could stop it, and she felt her cheeks warm. "Forgive me, that's far too personal." To her surprise, he smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face and creased the corners of his eyes. "No, Miss Galloway, no one waiting. The badge doesn't lend itself to settling down. That seems a lonely way to live. Maybe, but necessary." He looked at her then, truly looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. "What about you? No suitor back in Boston wondering where you've gone?" Zara shook her head. "My stepfather tried to arrange a match with a business associate, a man nearly twice my age. That's partly why I came west. To escape that future. And now I hope to build a life of my own choosing." She smiled. "If I can avoid being kidnapped by outlaws." His laugh was unexpected and warm, filling the room and lightening something in her chest. "I'll do my best to ensure that doesn't become a habit, Miss Galloway." "Zara," she said impulsively. "Please call me Zara." For a moment, the only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the steady drumming of rain on the roof. "Zara," he said finally, testing the name. "Then I'm Tuck, at least when we're not in formal company." The storm continued through the night and into the next day, the rain occasionally slackening to a drizzle before resuming its downpour. As the marshal had predicted, The creek beside the way station had swollen to a torrent, making travel impossible. Zara found herself unexpectedly content with the delay. She spent the morning helping Martha with chores, then sat by the window with a book Hank had lent her, a dog-eared copy of The Last of the Mohicans that had been left by a previous traveler. From her seat, she could see the stable where Marshal Adair, Tuck, she reminded herself, was tending to the horses. Even at this distance, there was something compelling about the way he moved, with economy and purpose, no motion wasted. "He's a good man," Martha said, appearing beside her with a cup of coffee. "One of the few lawmen the folks around here trust." "He saved my life," Zara replied simply. "I'll always be grateful for that." Martha's knowing smile suggested she heard more in Zara's words than mere gratitude. "Grateful's a start, I suppose." By evening, the rain had finally stopped, though Hank reported that the creek crossing would still be dangerous until morning. Another night at the way station meant another meal shared around the fire, another evening of stories and quiet conversation. When the others had retired, Zara once again found herself alone with Tuck by the dying embers. This time, the silence between them felt comfortable, laden with unspoken possibilities. "Tell me about Bozeman," she said at last. "What should I expect?" He considered for a moment. "It's growing fast. The gold strikes brought miners, the railroad brought merchants, and now families are putting down roots. They're trying to build something lasting." He smiled faintly. "They need people like you, educated, civilized, to help tame the wildness." "And what about you? Do you want the West tamed?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Never thought about it that way. Change comes whether we want it or not. I just try to make sure good folks can live their lives without fear while it happens." "A noble cause." "Not always noble in execution," he said, his expression darkening. "I've done things I'm not proud of, Zara, things necessary to uphold the law." She studied his face, the way the firelight caught the small scar above his right eyebrow, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. "I think," she said slowly, "that a man who worries about whether his actions are noble is probably more noble than he believes." He looked up, meeting her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might say more, might even reach for her hand where it rested on the arm of her chair. Instead, he stood abruptly. "Dawn comes early," he said, his voice gruff. "Should get some rest before the ride tomorrow." Zara nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course. Good night, Tuck." He paused at the threshold of the hallway, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Good night, Zara." Morning brought clear skies and the news that the creek had receded enough to cross safely. By mid-morning, their small party was on the trail again, Zara once more riding double with Tuck while Pete led the prisoners' horses. The air was fresh after the storm, filled with the scent of wet earth and pine, and the mountains in the distance seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. "We'll reach Bozeman by nightfall," Tuck told her as they rode through a meadow dotted with wildflowers. "The school board chairman, Mr. Franklin, has arranged lodgings for you with the widow Cooper until you get settled." "You seem to know a lot about my arrangements," Zara observed, curious. He shifted slightly behind her. "I make it my business to know what happens in the territory, especially when it involves newcomers who might need protection." "And do many newcomers need your protection, Marshal?" His chuckle vibrated against her back. "More than you'd think, Miss Galloway." They had slipped back into formality, as if the intimacy of their fireside conversations had been a dream. Zara found herself missing the sound of her name on his lips, the way his eyes had softened when he looked at her across the flames. The day passed pleasantly as they traveled through varied terrain, lush valleys, pine forests, and rolling hills that gradually gave way to the broader valley where Bozeman had been established. Tuck pointed out landmarks along the way, naming peaks and telling stories of the land and its people, both white and Native American. The Crow called this the Valley of Flowers, he told her as they crossed a particularly beautiful stretch of land. They hunted here for generations before the settlers came. Where are they now? Mostly on reservations to the east, he said grimly. Not all changes are for the better. It was late afternoon when they crested a final hill, and Bozeman spread out before them, a bustling town nestled at the foot of mountains, with neat rows of buildings along a main street and homes scattered beyond. Smoke rose from chimneys, and even from this distance, Zara could see people moving about their business. "It's larger than I expected," she said, drinking in her first view of what would be her new home. "Fastest growing town in the territory," Tuck replied. "Gold and the promise of the railroad will do that." As they rode down the main street, heads turned. A U.S. Marshal with prisoners in tow was always noteworthy, but Zara suspected her presence, a young woman in a borrowed dress, riding double with the marshal, was causing even more speculation. They stopped first at the jail, a solid building of stone and timber near the center of town. The sheriff, a burly man named Larson, came out to meet them. "Caught the Yates Gang, I see," he said, eyeing the prisoners. "Heard about the stage robbery. Bad business." "2 dead, 2 to stand trial," Tuck confirmed, dismounting and then reaching up to help Zara down. His hands lingered at her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Sheriff Larson's eyebrows rose as he took in Zara's presence. "And who might this be?" "Miss Zara Galloway," Tuck said formally. "The new schoolteacher. She was a passenger on the stage the Yates Gang attacked." The sheriff's expression softened immediately. "Miss Galloway, we've been worried sick about you." Mr. Franklin's been beside himself, thinking he'd lost another teacher before school even started. "Another?" Zara asked. "The gentleman before you took one look at our little town and decided it was too rough for his liking," Sheriff Larson explained. "Caught the next stage east." While Deputy Pete and Sheriff Larson dealt with the prisoners, Tuck escorted Zara to the school board chairman's office above the town's only bank. Mr. Franklin, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers and a perpetually worried expression, practically wept with relief at the sight of her. "Miss Galloway, thank the Lord you're safe, when we heard about the stage." He broke off, dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. "Well, it doesn't bear thinking about. Marshal Adair, you have the town's deepest gratitude for bringing our teacher to us." Tuck nodded, his expression returning to the professional mask he wore as marshal. "Just doing my duty, sir." Miss Galloway showed remarkable courage throughout her ordeal. The praise warmed her, though she knew she had done little but survive. While Mr. Franklin fussed over arrangements and paperwork, explaining that school would begin in 2 weeks and that the widow Cooper was expecting her, Zara found herself watching Tuck. He stood by the window, hat in hand, looking out at the town with the vigilant gaze of a man accustomed to spotting trouble before it found him. Would he leave now that his mission was complete? The thought sent an unexpected pang through her chest. "Marshal, you will join us for supper, won't you?" Mr. Franklin was saying, "The town council would like to express our thanks properly." Tuck hesitated, glancing at Zara. "That's kind, but I should see to my deputy and make sure the prisoners are secure." "Nonsense," Franklin insisted. "Sheriff Larson can manage for one evening. We're dining at the Grand Hotel at 7. Mrs. Cooper will bring Miss Galloway." With arrangements made and a promise extracted from Tuck that he would attend the dinner, Zara found herself being whisked away to her new lodgings. The widow Cooper proved to be a sprightly woman in her 60s with bright blue eyes, and a no-nonsense manner that Zara immediately liked. "Lord above, child, you've had quite the introduction to Montana, Mrs. Cooper said as she showed Zara to a neat room on the second floor of her comfortable home. Kidnapped by outlaws and rescued by Tucker Adair himself. That's a story to tell your grandchildren someday. Zara blushed. He was just doing his job, Mrs. Cooper. The older woman's knowing look was disconcertingly similar to Martha's at the way station. I've known Tuck Adair for 5 years, since he first took the marshal's badge. Never known him to personally escort anyone to their destination before. She patted Zara's arm. Now, let's find you something suitable to wear for dinner. That dress has seen better days. 2 hours later, Zara descended the stairs in a borrowed gown of deep green that Mrs. Cooper had altered with swift, sure stitches to fit her slender frame. Her hair was pinned up in a simple but elegant style, and color had returned to her cheeks after a proper bath and meal. Mrs. Cooper nodded approvingly. "You'll do, my dear. I dare say our marshal won't know what hit him." "Mrs. Cooper." Zara protested, though she couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation in her stomach at the thought of seeing Tuck again. The Grand Hotel was the finest establishment in Bozeman, its dining room adorned with crystal chandeliers and linen-covered tables. When Zara entered with Mrs. Cooper, conversation momentarily ceased as heads turned to inspect the new arrival. At a large table in the center of the room sat Mr. Franklin, and several other men she assumed were town council members, along with their wives. And there, looking distinctly uncomfortable in clean clothes that weren't trail-worn, was Tuck. He had shaved, she noticed, and his damp hair suggested a recent bath. When he saw her, he stood abruptly, nearly upsetting his water glass. "Miss Galloway," he said, recovering his composure. "You look recovered." It wasn't the most eloquent compliment she'd ever received, but the intensity in his eyes as he held her chair made the simple words feel significant. Dinner was a lengthy affair, with multiple courses and speeches from various council members welcoming Zara to Bozeman and thanking the marshal for his service. Tuck endured the attention stoically, saying little but watching Zara with a quiet intensity that made her pulse quicken whenever their eyes met across the table. As the meal concluded, Mr. Franklin announced that the new schoolhouse would be ready before classes began, and that a social would be held the following Saturday to introduce Miss Galloway to the community. "You'll stay for the social, won't you, Marshal Adair?" asked Mrs. Franklin, a plump woman with a kind face. It would mean so much to the children to have a real hero in attendance. Tuck shifted uncomfortably. "I have duties that take me throughout the territory, madam. Can't promise I'll be here." Zara felt a sharp disappointment at his words, though she kept her expression neutral. Of course, he wouldn't stay. He had said himself that he had no permanent home, that his life was on the trail bringing justice to the lawless. As the gathering broke up, with promises from the ladies to call on Zara in the coming days, she found herself momentarily alone with Tuck in the hotel's small garden. "Will you really leave tomorrow?" she asked, unable to keep the question inside. He studied her face in the lamplight spilling from the hotel windows. "I have reports to file in Helena, and there's always someone needing the law's attention somewhere in the territory." "Of course." She looked away, suddenly fascinated by a rosebush climbing the garden trellis. "I'm grateful for all you've done, Marshal. I wouldn't be here without you." "Tuck," he corrected softly, "at least when it's just us." She met his gaze then, searching for something in his storm-gray eyes. "Will there be other times when it's just us, Tuck?" For a long moment he didn't answer. Then, with a gentleness that belied his strength, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I'd like that, Zara. Very much." The touch of his fingers against her cheek sent warmth cascading through her body. "Then perhaps you should make an effort to attend the social on Saturday," she suggested, summoning a confidence she didn't entirely feel. His smile, rare and transformative, appeared briefly. "Perhaps I should." The week that followed was a whirlwind of activity as Zara settled into her new life. She met with parents, organized her classroom in the newly completed schoolhouse, and endured a seemingly endless procession of visitors bringing welcome gifts and barely concealed curiosity about her adventure with the Outlaws and the handsome Marshal. To her disappointment, Tuck had indeed left town the morning after the dinner, riding out with Deputy Pete before dawn. Sheriff Larson, who seemed to have appointed himself her unofficial guardian in the Marshal's absence, assured her that this was normal. "Adair's territory covers half of Montana," he explained as he walked her home from the schoolhouse one afternoon. "He's always where the trouble is worst. Man doesn't know how to rest." "He mentioned reports in Helena," Zara said, trying to sound casual. The sheriff nodded. "Territorial capital. He'll check in with the governor, file his paperwork, then likely be off again tracking whatever outlaw's causing the most grief. It sounds lonely." Sheriff Larson gave her a shrewd look. "It is, but Adair's not the type to complain. Lost his whole family, young father killed in the line of duty, mother to illness, sister to a winter fever. Been on his own since he was 18. The information gave Zara a new understanding of the quiet strength she had sensed in Tuck, the reserve that seemed as much protection as personality. Saturday arrived, and with it the social in her honor. The town hall had been decorated with bunting and wildflowers, and a small band played lively tunes as what seemed like the entire population of Bozeman turned out to welcome their new teacher. Zara wore her best dress, a deep blue silk that she had carefully preserved for special occasions, and tried to remember the names of the many people who approached to introduce themselves. Parents proudly presented children who would be her students. Young men asked her to dance with varying degrees of awkwardness, and the ladies of the town's charitable society enlisted her for various committees before she quite knew what was happening. Through it all, she found her eyes drawn repeatedly to the door, hoping for a glimpse of a tall figure in a marshal's badge. But as the evening wore on and there was no sign of him, she began to accept that Tuck wouldn't come, that whatever connection she had imagined between them had been one-sided, a product of her gratitude and the intensity of their shared experience. "He'll come if he can, Mrs. Cooper said quietly, appearing at her side as if reading her thoughts. "The man's never broken a promise that I've heard tell of." "I don't recall him actually promising," Zara replied, trying to hide her disappointment. The widow patted her hand. "Trust an old woman who's seen a thing or two. That man will move heaven and earth to be here tonight." As if summoned by her words, a stir went through the crowd. Heads turned toward the door and the volume of conversation dropped momentarily. Zara looked up and felt her heart leap. Tuck stood in the doorway, hat in hand, scanning the room. He was dressed in clean clothes, his badge polished and gleaming on his vest, his face freshly shaved. When his eyes found hers, the rest of the room seemed to fade away. He made his way to her side, nodding to acquaintances but never taking his eyes from her face. "Miss Galloway," he said formally when he reached her, mindful of the watching crowd. "I hope I haven't missed too much of your celebration." "Not at all, Marshal," she replied, unable to keep the smile from her face. "It's only just getting started, Mrs. Cooper," with a discretion that Zara would later thank her for, melted away into the crowd, leaving them in a bubble of relative privacy despite the busy room. "You came," Zara said softly. "I said I would." His eyes traveled over her face as if memorizing every feature. You look beautiful, Zara." The sincerity in his voice made her blush. "Thank you. Was your business in Helena successful?" "Routine," he said with a dismissive shrug. "Though the governor had plenty to say about the Yates Gang, your name came up." Her eyebrows rose. "Mine, your statement was part of my report. The governor was impressed by your courage." A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "As am I." The band struck up a waltz and couples moved to the center of the room. Tuck hesitated, then offered his hand. "Would you do me the honor, Miss Galloway?" Zara placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength carefully restrained as he led her to the dance floor. "I didn't take you for a dancing man, Marshal. There's a lot about me you don't know yet," he replied, settling his other hand at her waist. The word yet hung between them, full of promise, as he guided her into the waltz. He moved with surprising grace for a man who spent most of his life in the saddle, leading her through the steps with confidence. "Where did a lawman learn to dance?" she asked, acutely aware of his hand warm against her back, the scant inches between their bodies. "My mother insisted," he said, a fleeting sadness crossing his features. "Said a gentleman should know how to dance properly, badge or no badge." She was right. They circled the floor, conversation falling away as they moved together in perfect harmony. Zara was conscious of the eyes on them, the speculation that must be running through the town at the sight of their new teacher in the arms of the territorial marshal. But for once, she didn't care what others thought. When the music ended, Tuck didn't immediately release her hand. "Would you walk with me? Get some air?" She nodded, and he led her toward the doors that opened onto a small veranda. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. From here, they could still hear the music and laughter from inside, but they were blissfully alone. "I have something for you," Tuck said, reaching into his vest pocket. "Found it when we were tracking the Yates Gang, before we found you." He held out a small object that gleamed silver in the moonlight, a locket on a delicate chain. "My mother's locket," Zara breathed, taking it with trembling fingers. "I thought it was lost forever. It must have fallen when they took me from the stage." "Open it," he suggested gently. Inside was a small portrait of a handsome man with kind eyes, her father, and a lock of blonde hair that had been her mother's. Tears sprang to her eyes as she cradled the precious memento. "I can't believe you found this." "Thank you, Tuck." He took the necklace from her hands. "Turn around. Let me." She did, gathering her hair to one side as he fastened the chain around her neck. His fingers brushed the sensitive skin at her nape, lingering perhaps longer than necessary. When she turned back to face him, he was closer than before, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body in the cool evening air. "I've thought about you every day since I left," he admitted, his voice low and rough with emotion. "Couldn't get you out of my mind." Zara's heart raced. "I've thought about you too, wondered where you were, if you were safe." His hand rose to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with exquisite gentleness. "I'm not a settled man, Zara. The badge takes me all over the territory. It's not the kind of life." "Not the kind of life to offer a woman," she finished for him. "I came west for adventure, Tuck, to make my own choices. And I choose—" She never finished the sentence because his lips found hers in a kiss so tender it made her heart ache. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened, becoming something hungry and needful. Zara wound her arms around his neck, responding with a passion that surprised even her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Tuck rested his forehead against hers. "I had a speech prepared," he said with a rueful laugh. "About how we barely know each other, how this is too fast, how I should give you time to settle into your new life before—" "Before what?" she prompted when he fell silent. "Before asking if I might court you properly." His eyes searched hers. I know it hasn't been long, but what happened in that canyon, seeing you in danger, it clarified some things for me. For me as well, she said softly. Life is precious and uncertain. Why waste time denying what we both feel? He kissed her again, more gently this time. I'll be away often, he warned. The territory needs its marshal, and Bozeman needs its teacher, she replied, but we'll find a way to make it work, if that's what you want. It is, he said with a certainty that warmed her to her core, more than I've wanted anything in a very long time. From inside came the sound of laughter and music, the life of the town continuing without them. For a moment longer they remained on the veranda, wrapped in each other's arms, the future stretching before them like the star-filled Montana sky, vast, unknown, and full of possibility. The following months brought changes to Bozeman, and to Zara's life that she could never have predicted. The school term began, and she found herself adoring her work, guiding children of all ages through their studies with a passion that quickly earned her the respect of even the most skeptical parents. The town continued to grow, with new businesses opening along Main Street and more families arriving on each stage and train. And then there was Tuck. True to his word, his duties took him throughout the territory, sometimes for weeks at a time. But equally true to his promise, he returned to Bozeman to her whenever he could. Their courtship progressed under the watchful eyes of the town, which had collectively decided that the romance between their schoolteacher and the marshal was the most exciting thing to happen since the last gold strike. Letters bridged the gaps between his visits, her neat penmanship filling pages with news of the school and town, his more rugged hand detailing just enough of his work to reassure her without causing worry. They met when he returned, sometimes for proper dinners at Mrs. Cooper's house, sometimes for walks along the creek that ran behind the town, sometimes for quiet evenings on the schoolhouse porch where they could talk for hours about everything and nothing. In October, as golden leaves fell from the cottonwoods and the first hint of winter touched the air, Tuck returned from a particularly long absence, tracking a gang of cattle rustlers into the Dakota Territory. Zara had just dismissed her students for the day when he appeared in the schoolhouse doorway, trail-worn but smiling. "Marshal Adair," she said formally, though her heart leapt at the sight of him. "This is an unexpected pleasure." He removed his hat as he entered, his eyes never leaving her face. "Miss Galloway, hope I'm not interrupting your work." "Not at all. I was just finishing for the day." She set aside the papers she'd been grading and moved around her desk, unable to maintain the pretense of formality. "I missed you." In 2 strides he crossed the room and gathered her in his arms, his kiss leaving no doubt that he had missed her equally. When they finally broke apart, he kept her close, his arms around her waist. "3 weeks feels like an eternity," he murmured against her hair. "Did you catch your rustlers?" "All 5 safely delivered to the fort to await trial." He pulled back slightly to look at her. "But that's not what I want to talk about right now." Something in his tone made her pulse quicken. "What is it?" He took her hand and led her to the front row of student desks, sitting down and pulling her to sit beside him. The sight of his large frame wedged into the small desk made her smile despite her curiosity. "I've been doing a lot of thinking while I was away," he began, still holding her hand. "About my life, about what I want for the future." Zara's heart began to race. "And what conclusions did you reach, Marshal?" "That I've been wandering long enough." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "The governor offered me a new position, sheriff of Gallatin County, based here in Bozeman." Her eyes widened. "You'd be staying here, permanently," he nodded. "Sheriff Larson's retiring come spring, says his joints can't take another Montana winter." A smile touched his lips. "I told the governor I'd think about it." "And have you thought about it?" I have." His eyes were serious now, the gray darkened with emotion. "But the decision isn't just mine to make, not anymore." Confusion furrowed her brow. "I don't understand." Tuck shifted, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small object. When he opened his hand, a ring lay on his palm, a simple gold band with a small, perfect diamond that caught the afternoon light streaming through the schoolhouse windows. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "The only thing of value I have from my family. I've carried it with me all these years, waiting for—" He took a deep breath. "Waiting for the right woman to give it to." Zara couldn't speak, her throat tight with emotion as she stared at the ring gleaming in his palm. "I love you, Zara Galloway," Tuck said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I think I started falling for you the moment I found you in that canyon, so brave despite everything you'd been through. These months have only confirmed what I knew then, that you're the woman I want to spend my life with." He slid from the desk to one knee before her, still holding the ring. "I'm asking you to be my wife, to build a life here in Bozeman, or wherever else life might take us. I can't promise it will always be easy, but I can promise that I will love you and protect you until my dying day." Tears blurred her vision as she looked down at this strong, honorable man kneeling before her. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes, Tucker Adair, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her into his arms, lifting her off the ground in his enthusiasm. Their laughter echoed in the empty schoolhouse, a joyful sound that seemed to bless the simple wooden walls. "When?" she asked when he finally set her down, her arms still wound around his neck. "As soon as you're ready," he replied. "Though Mrs. Cooper suggested we wait until spring when the weather's better for a proper celebration." Zara laughed. "You discussed this with Mrs. Cooper?" He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I may have sought her advice on a few matters, and Mr. Franklin's as head of the school board, and Reverend Thomas, about using the church. Is there anyone in town who doesn't know you were planning to propose?" "Possibly the blacksmith's new apprentice," he admitted with a grin, "but I wouldn't wager on it." The news of their engagement spread through Bozeman like wildfire, bringing a flood of well wishes and, to Zara's amusement, more than a few knowing looks from those who had predicted this outcome from the moment the marshal had ridden into town with the new schoolteacher. Winter descended on Montana with a fury that Zara, despite her Boston upbringing, found impressive. Snow piled in drifts taller than a man, and the temperature dropped so low that the creek froze solid. School continued, with students arriving bundled in layers of wool and fur, stomping snow from their boots before settling at their desks. Tuck divided his time between his marshal's duties and Bozeman, where he worked alongside Sheriff Larson, learning the specific challenges of the growing town. He had formally accepted the governor's offer, with the transition to take place in April, after their planned wedding. In January, during a rare warm spell that melted some of the snow, Tuck took Zara to see the house he had purchased on the edge of town, a sturdy two-story home with a broad porch and views of the mountains beyond. "It needs work," he cautioned as he showed her through the empty rooms. The previous owner left rather suddenly when his mining investments failed. Zara walked from room to room, already imagining curtains at the windows, a table where they would share meals, the comfortable chairs where they would sit in the evenings. "It's perfect," she declared, turning to him with shining eyes. "Absolutely perfect." He pulled her close, his arms strong and warm around her. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've already contracted with the carpenter to make repairs before the wedding." "Our home," she marveled, resting her head against his chest. "I never thought when I left Boston that I would find this. You." Fate works in mysterious ways, he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Though I'd prefer if it hadn't involved you being kidnapped by outlaws. She laughed. When you put it that way, it does seem like a rather extreme introduction. As winter gradually loosened its grip on the land, preparations for the wedding intensified. The ladies of Bozeman took charge, planning everything from the flowers, which would have to be brought in on the train from more temperate regions, to the wedding supper, a community affair that promised to be the social event of the season. Zara found herself swept along in the excitement, grateful for the support of Mrs. Cooper and the other women who had become her friends over the months. Her students were equally enthused, the girls sighing romantically over their teacher's love story, the boys impressed that she was marrying the famous Marshal Adair. April arrived with gentle rains that washed away the last of the snow and coaxed green shoots from the earth. The mountains stood majestic against clear blue skies, and the air carried the promise of renewal that always came with spring. The day before the wedding, Tuck was called away unexpectedly, a dispute at a ranch outside of town that threatened to turn violent. He returned late that night to find Zara waiting on the porch of Mrs. Cooper's house, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. "Should you be seeing the bride before the wedding?" she teased as he dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post. "Probably not, but I couldn't stay away." He climbed the steps to sit beside her on the porch swing. "Nervous, a little," she admitted, "but not about marrying you, just about standing in front of the entire town tomorrow." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over the engagement ring that had become so familiar on her finger. "We could still elope. There's a justice of the peace in Virginia City who owes me a favor." Zara laughed. "And face the wrath of every woman in Bozeman, I think not." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Besides, I want to marry you in front of everyone. I want them all to know how much I love you." "I never thought I'd find this," he said after a moment of comfortable silence. "A home, a woman to share it with. For so long the badge was enough. And now I want more." His eyes, when they met hers, were full of a tenderness that still took her breath away. "A life with you, maybe someday, a family of our own." The image of children with Tuck's gray eyes and strong spirit made her heart swell. "I'd like that very much." He kissed her then, a kiss full of promise and longing and the certainty of a future together. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I should go. Mrs. Cooper will be out here with her broom if I stay much longer." "Until tomorrow, then," Zara said, reluctantly releasing his hand. "Until tomorrow, Miss Galloway." He smiled, the special smile that was hers alone. "And then forever, Mrs. Adair." The wedding day dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself approved of the union. The church was filled to overflowing, with even the children from Zara's school permitted to attend, scrubbed clean and on their best behavior for their beloved teacher's special day. Zara wore a gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Franklin had helped her select from a catalog, modified by the town's dressmaker to suit her slender frame. Her honey blonde hair was arranged in an elegant knot, adorned with small white flowers, and she carried a bouquet of spring blossoms gathered from the hillsides around Bozeman. When the church doors opened and she began her walk down the aisle, her eyes found Tuck immediately. He stood tall and straight at the altar, wearing a new black suit instead of his usual trail clothes, his badge polished and gleaming on his vest. The look of wonder on his face as he watched her approach would stay with her always. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion, the reverend's solemn words, the promises they made to each other, the gentle slide of the gold band onto her finger joining her mother's ring. And then they were walking back down the aisle together, husband and wife, into the bright Montana sunshine, and the cheers of the townsfolk who had become their family. The celebration continued well into the evening, with feasting and dancing and speeches that alternately made them laugh and brought tears to their eyes. Deputy Pete, now Sheriff Larson's replacement, told stories of Tuck's bravery that made Zara's heart race even now. Mrs. Cooper recounted how she had known from the first that the marshal and the schoolteacher were destined for each other. As the stars appeared in the darkening sky, Tuck led his bride away from the festivities to the waiting carriage that would take them to their new home. They rode in contented silence, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. "Happy, Mrs. Adair?" he asked as the house came into view, lanterns glowing in the windows, a wedding gift from friends who had gone ahead to prepare for their arrival. "Completely," she replied, lifting her face for his kiss. "This is everything I dreamed of, Tuck, everything and more." He helped her from the carriage, but before she could walk to the house, he swept her into his arms. "Tradition," he explained with a grin as he carried her up the porch steps. Inside, they found the house transformed from the empty shell she had seen months ago. Furniture filled the rooms, some new, some gifted by townsfolk, all arranged with care. Flowers adorned tables, and a fire burned cheerfully in the hearth, taking the chill from the spring evening. "Welcome home, Zara," Tuck said softly, setting her on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "Our home," she whispered, feeling a sense of rightness, of belonging that she had never known before. Later, as they lay together in the quiet of their bedroom, the silver moonlight spilling through the window, Zara traced the lines of her husband's face with gentle fingers. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "That life takes us on unexpected journeys," she replied. "When I boarded that stagecoach in Boston, I never imagined where it would truly lead me." "To a canyon full of outlaws," he teased. "To you," she corrected, her heart full. "To this life we're building together." He gathered her closer, his kiss a seal on the promises they had made. "I love you, Zara Adair." "And I love you, Tucker Adair," she whispered against his lips. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come." In the years that followed, Bozeman continued to grow and prosper, as did the Adairs. Tuck proved to be a fair and respected sheriff, maintaining order in the rapidly expanding town with the same quiet authority he had shown as a marshal. Zara continued teaching until the birth of their first child, a son they named James after Tuck's father, born almost exactly a year after their wedding. 2 years later, a daughter joined their family, Elizabeth, with her mother's blonde hair and her father's gray eyes. Though Zara had stepped away from formal teaching, she maintained a connection to education, serving on the school board and occasionally substituting when needed. Their home became a gathering place for friends and neighbors, the porch that Tuck had expanded himself filled with comfortable chairs where stories were shared and laughter rang out on warm summer evenings. In winter, the hearth drew people close, with Mrs. Cooper now as much a grandmother to their children, as if she were related by blood, often occupying the rocking chair nearest the fire. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, as spring once again brought renewal to the Montana landscape, Tuck and Zara rode out alone, leaving the children in Mrs. Cooper's capable care. They traveled through the valley, past meadows bright with wildflowers, until they reached a familiar spot, the canyon where they had first met. "It looks different now," Zara observed as they dismounted. "Less threatening." "Time changes how we see things," Tuck agreed, taking her hand as they walked to the spot where the Outlaws' camp had been. No trace remained now, just smooth stone and spring grass. "I was so afraid," she remembered, leaning against him. "And then you appeared, like something from a dime novel, the hero riding in to save the day." He laughed, the the sound echoing off the canyon walls. Hardly a hero, just a man doing his job. His arm tightened around her waist. Though I'll admit, the moment I saw you so defiant despite everything, something changed for me. For me as well, she said softly. You made me feel safe in the midst of danger. You still do. They spread a blanket near a stand of cottonwoods and shared the picnic lunch they had brought, talking of the past 5 years and their hopes for the future. Their children, the town, the lives they had built together from the unlikely beginning in this very canyon. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Tuck pulled Zara close, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held all the passion and tenderness of their first days together. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair. "For what?" "For being brave enough to come west, for surviving that canyon, for saying yes when a dusty lawman asked you to share his life." Zara smiled, her heart full as she looked up at the man who had rescued her in more ways than one. "I think we rescued each other, Tuck." As they rode home in the gathering twilight, Bozeman's lights twinkling in the distance like earthbound stars, Zara thought of the journey that had brought her here. The stagecoach, the outlaws, the canyon that had seemed like an ending but had proven to be just the beginning. Life in the West wasn't always easy. There were harsh winters, occasional droughts, the normal challenges of raising children and maintaining a home, while Tuck's duties sometimes kept him away. But through it all they had each other, a love forged in danger and cultivated in peace, growing stronger with each passing year. The house came into view, lamplight glowing in the windows, and Zara could imagine the scene inside Mrs. Cooper reading to the children, the aroma of supper waiting, the comfort of home. "Race you," Tuck said suddenly, a boyish grin lighting his face as he urged his horse forward. Laughing, Zara followed, her hair coming loose from its pins to stream behind her like a golden banner. They thundered across the last stretch of open land toward their home, side by side, together as they had been from that fateful day in the canyon, a schoolteacher who had found her courage and a lawman who had found his heart, riding toward the future they would continue to build together, day by day, in the wild and beautiful land they both now called home.